The steady ticking of the clock echoed through my tiny apartment, each second slicing into the silence like a dull blade. The sound was monotonous, yet it gnawed at me, relentless and suffocating. Outside, the faint glow of streetlights filtered through thin curtains, casting long shadows that danced mockingly across the walls. The room felt cold not just from the chill seeping in through cracks in the window frame, but from something deeper, heavier, an emptiness I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. I sat on the edge of an old sofa, its fabric worn thin and sagging under my weight. My eyes drifted to the corner of the room where a small wooden table stood, wobbling slightly as if even it couldn't bear the burden of what rested upon it, a cheap birthday cake. One lonely candle flickered weakly atop the frosting, its flame trembling against a draft creeping in from somewhere unseen. The scent of artificial vanilla wafted up, cloying and artificial, almost mocking in its sweetness. "Happy birthday, Alex," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the oppressive quiet. It wasn't much of a celebration, just me, this sad little cake, and the crushing realization that once again, no one cared enough to remember. My phone lay face down on the table beside me, its screen dark and lifeless. No messages, no calls, not even a generic happy birthday notification from some forgotten app or social media platform. Nothing. 5 years. 5 birthdays swallowed whole by indifference. Each year, I'd hoped, maybe foolishly, that things would change, that someone, anyone, might care. But here I was, staring at another unlit screen, another hollow evening stretching out before me like a never-ending void. Rick, my father, had always treated me like a burden, a reminder of his failures rather than a son he should cherish. He spent most days drowning in debt, chasing get-rich-quick schemes that inevitably collapsed around him. When he wasn't ranting about money, he was berating me for not contributing enough, for being a freeloader, as if surviving under his roof without so much as a kind word constituted freeloading. Karen, my mother, lived in her own world of fantasy land where our family was perfect, admired by all who knew us. She spent hours crafting stories about our supposedly idyllic lives, sharing them with friends over coffee or wine while conveniently omitting any mention of me, unless absolutely necessary. And when she did acknowledge my existence, it was usually to criticize me for not smiling more, for not fitting into her carefully curated image of perfection. Then there was Jake, my younger brother. At 18, he was everything I wasn't, or at least, everything they wanted me to be. Outgoing, carefree, obsessed with his phone and his friends. To him, I was nothing more than a punching bag, someone to ridicule for taking life too seriously. "You need to loosen up," he'd say, laughing as though my struggles were nothing more than a bad joke. And now, here I was again, alone on my birthday, left to celebrate with a store-bought cake and a single candle. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was supposed to be my day, a moment set aside to remind me that I mattered. Instead, it only served as a painful reminder of just how invisible I truly was. But this year would be different. I leaned back against the sofa, letting my gaze wander around the room. The peeling wallpaper, stained carpet, and mismatched furniture told a story one of neglect, both physical and emotional. Everything here was temporary, a placeholder until I could afford something better. Until I could escape. The word lingered in my mind, heavy with possibility. For years, I dreamed of leaving this place, of starting fresh somewhere far away from the toxicity that had defined my childhood. But dreams weren't enough. I needed a plan, a way to make them pay not with anger, but with success. As I stared at the flickering candle, an idea began to take shape. What if I turned their indifference into fuel? What if I used their neglect as motivation to build something they couldn't ignore? Something so undeniable that it would force them to see me, to really see me for the first time in years? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, equal parts exhilaration and dread. It wouldn't be easy. In fact, it would likely be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But wasn't that better than sitting here waiting for scraps of attention that would never come? 5 years, I muttered aloud, my voice tinged with bitterness. That's long enough. With that, I reached forward and blew out the candle, plunging the room into near total darkness. The flame sputtered and died, leaving behind a thin trail of smoke that curled upward like a ghostly echo. For a moment, I simply sat there, letting the weight of the decision settle over me. Then, slowly, deliberately, I stood up. It was time to stop waiting for someone else to validate my worth. Time to stop hoping for crumbs of affection from people who didn't deserve my loyalty. From this point forward, I would carve my own path. I would become someone they couldn't overlook, someone they couldn't dismiss, someone they would regret forgetting. And maybe, just maybe, they'd finally understand what it meant to lose something precious. The night I left, the air was thick with tension. I stood at the edge of the driveway, my backpack slung over one shoulder, its weight pressing into my skin like a constant reminder of everything I was leaving behind, both the good and the bad. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark except for the faint glow from the living room where Rick sat hunched over his laptop, muttering curses under his breath about another failed investment. Karen's voice drifted out from the kitchen. Her laughter exaggerated as she recounted some fabricated story to a friend on the phone. Jake's music blared upstairs, oblivious to the world outside his headphones. None of them noticed me standing there, ready to disappear forever. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs, and stepped onto the bus that would carry me away from all of this. The engine roared to life beneath me, vibrating through the worn-out seats as we pulled away from the curb. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the window, watching the familiar streets blur into darkness. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I making a mistake? Could I really survive out there on my own? The bus rattled along winding roads, each turn jolting me further into uncertainty. The smell of gasoline filled the cabin, sharp and suffocating, mingling with the low hum of tires against asphalt. Outside, streetlights flickered past in a steady rhythm, their light casting fleeting shadows across my face. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and determination. This wasn't just an escape, it was a declaration. A promise to myself that I wouldn't let them define who I was anymore. When the bus finally rolled into the city, the skyline greeted me like a jagged wall of ambition. Towering buildings pierced the sky, their lights twinkling like stars trapped in concrete. It was beautiful, overwhelming, and terrifying all at once. But beauty doesn't pay the bills, and terror doesn't keep you warm when the temperature drops below freezing. The first few weeks were brutal. Every morning, I walked from one end of the city to the other, dropping off resumes at every cafe, convenience store, and fast food joint I could find. Most places didn't even bother calling me back. Those that did usually followed up with rejection emails so generic they might as well have been automated. By the time evening fell, I collapsed onto a park bench, exhausted and defeated, my stomach rolling angrily. Hunger became a constant companion, gnawing at me until it felt like my insides were hollow. One particularly frigid night, I curled up on a bench near the library, pulling my jacket tighter around me in a futile attempt to ward off the cold. My teeth chattered uncontrollably, and my fingers turned numb despite being shoved deep into my pockets. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it the distant sounds of car horns and drunken shouts. I stared up at the cloudy sky, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. "Hey, kid," a gruff voice interrupted my thoughts. I opened my eyes to see a man standing over me, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light of a nearby lamppost. He wore a tattered coat and carried a bottle wrapped in a brown paper bag. "You ain't got nowhere better to be." "I'm fine," I muttered, sitting up straighter. My voice trembled slightly, betraying my bravado. The man chuckled, taking a swig from his bottle before walking away, leaving me alone once more. That encounter stayed with me, not because of the man himself, but because of the realization that hit me like a punch to the gut. If I didn't figure something out soon, I'd end up just like him. It was during one of these desperate days that I stumbled upon a poster taped to a bulletin board outside the community center. In bold letters, it advertised a free coding competition for beginners, promising an internship at a local tech company to the winner. My heart raced as I read the details. Coding. I had no idea what that even meant, let alone how to do it. But desperation breeds courage, and I decided to take a chance. That night, I borrowed an old laptop from the library and started teaching myself the basics. The internet became my classroom, YouTube tutorials my professors. Hours turned into days, then weeks as I poured every ounce of energy into learning. There were moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, when frustration bubbled over and I wanted to throw the laptop across the room. But I kept going, fueled by the memory of those lonely nights in the park and the determination to prove everyone wrong, including myself. One evening, after countless late-night coding sessions, I finally finished my project, a simple budgeting app designed to help users track their expenses. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. When I submitted it for the competition, I felt a surge of pride unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For the first time in years, I believed I might actually have a shot at something real. To my disbelief, I won. Not only did I secure the internship, but the judges praised my creativity and problem-solving skills. Standing on stage as they handed me the trophy, I allowed myself a rare moment of triumph. Finally, someone saw value in me, not because of who my family was or what they expected of me, but because of what I had created. But success is never straightforward. At the internship, I faced new challenges. Some coworkers resented me for landing the position despite having no prior experience. One manager, in particular, seemed determined to make my life miserable, criticizing every line of code I wrote and dismissing my ideas without consideration. Clients demanded perfection, often sending back projects multiple times with nitpicky feedback. Nights blurred into mornings as I struggled to meet deadlines while battling self-doubt. There were times when I considered giving up, convinced I wasn't cut out for this world. But then I remembered why. I started to show them all that I was more than the person they dismissed. And slowly, things began to change. My hard work paid off, earning me promotions and recognition within the company. Eventually, I saved enough money to move out of the cramped studio apartment I'd been renting and into a place with actual walls and windows that didn't rattle in the wind. As my confidence grew, so did my ambitions. Instead of settling for a stable job, I decided to strike out on my own. I founded a startup focused on developing innovative software solutions for small businesses. It wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, financial risks, and countless setbacks, but I persevered. Within a year, my company secured contracts with major corporations, catapulting me into a level of success I never imagined possible. Looking back, I realized how far I'd come. From sleeping on park benches to running a thriving business, I had transformed pain into power. And though part of me still harbored resentment toward my family for the years of neglect, another part understood that their indifference had been a catalyst for my transformation. "This is just the beginning," I whispered to myself one night, staring out at the glittering cityscape from my office window. "They'll see. They'll all see." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse apartment, bathing everything in a warm golden glow. Below, the city buzzed with life, cars honking, pedestrians rushing to work, and the occasional siren wailing in the distance. I stood by the counter, sipping my black coffee, its bitterness sharp on my tongue but comforting in its familiarity. This was my sanctuary now, a sleek, modern space filled with minimalist furniture, polished hardwood floors, and an unobstructed view of the skyline. Every corner of this place screamed success, a stark contrast to the cramped, dingy rooms I'd once called home. My phone vibrated loudly against the marble countertop, startling me out of my thoughts. I glanced down at the screen and saw Karen's name flashing across it. A message awaited me: "Alex, come home right now. If you don't, your bank account will be frozen." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter bark that echoed off the walls. Bank account? What bank account? They were referring to the old savings account they kept under their control. Since I left 4 years ago, it had been so long since I even thought about it that it might as well have ceased to exist for me. That money wasn't mine anymore, it belonged to them. Just like everything else they tried to hold over my head. Before I could process the absurdity of the situation, another notification popped up. This time, it was from Rick. "The family misses you. We need to talk. Come back immediately." I stared at the words, my fingers tightening around the mug until my knuckles turned white. They miss me. After 5 years of forgetting my existence entirely? The irony was almost too much to bear. My lips curled into a cynical smile as anger simmered beneath the surface. "Of course," I muttered aloud, setting the coffee cup down with more force than necessary. "It's never about actually caring. There's always something else." I leaned back against the counter, letting the weight of the messages sink in. Why now? Why, after all these years of silence, did they suddenly decide to reach out? And why the urgency? Freezing my bank account? Threatening legal action? Something big must have happened, something desperate enough to make them swallow their pride and beg for my help. Rick's debts, no doubt. He was always chasing one scheme or another, drowning deeper into financial ruin with each failed venture. But this felt different, more calculated, more personal. Whatever mess he'd gotten himself into, it was bad enough to drag me back into their toxic orbit. And Karen, she probably saw an opportunity to play the role of the loving mother again, spinning some sob story about how much they needed me. But Jake, what was his angle? Was he still the same entitled brat who mocked me for being too serious? Or had he matured, only to become another pawn in their game? I shook my head, pushing those questions aside for now. Their motives didn't matter. What mattered was how I would respond. For a moment, I considered ignoring them altogether. Let them stew in their own problems. After all, hadn't I spent years proving that I didn't need them? That I could thrive without their validation? But then a thought occurred to me, one that sent a thrill coursing through my veins. This wasn't just an intrusion, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to confront them. To show them exactly what they'd lost when they chose to forget about me. I walked over to my desk, pulling open a drawer to retrieve a folder I'd kept hidden away. Inside were documents detailing every milestone I'd achieved since leaving home: the awards, the contracts, the press coverage, photos of my luxurious lifestyle, screenshots of my company's revenue reports, and even a few candid shots of me smiling confidently at networking events. All the evidence I needed to prove that I was no longer the invisible, powerless person they dismissed. As I flipped through the pages, a plan began to form in my mind. I wouldn't go back empty-handed. No, this time, I would walk into that house as someone they couldn't ignore, someone they would regret underestimating. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. I booked a car service, nothing flashy, just a sleek black sedan and packed a small overnight bag. Then, I spent some time rehearsing what I would say, imagining their faces when they realized I wasn't the same Alex they pushed aside all those years ago. Would Rick try to guilt-trip me? Would Karen attempt to charm her way out of trouble? And Jake, would he sneer at me, pretending he didn't care? Or would jealousy seep through his carefully constructed facade? By the time evening rolled around, I was ready. Dressed in a tailored suit that screamed authority, I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the door slid shut behind me, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirrored walls. Gone was the insecure teenager who had fled that house in the dead of night. In his place stood a man who commanded respect, a man who had built an empire from nothing. The drive to my childhood home was surreal. Streetlights flickered past as we left the city behind, giving way to quiet suburbs and familiar landmarks. Memories flooded back, unbidden, the arguments, the silences, the birthdays ignored, but I pushed them aside. This wasn't about reliving the past. It was about rewriting it. When the car pulled up to the curb, I hesitated for a split second before stepping out. The house looked smaller than I remembered, its paint peeling and roof tiles cracked. For a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. This place held no power over me anymore. I straightened my tie, adjusted my cufflinks, and strode toward the front door. Before knocking, I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, this is it. This time, I'm the one in control. The sleek black sedan rolled to a stop in front of the house, its tires crunching softly against the gravel driveway. The engine purred one last time before falling silent, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly as memories flooded back, memories I had spent years trying to bury. This place, this crumbling relic of my past, was supposed to hold no power over me anymore. And yet, here I was, returning like a ghost to haunt the people who had once dismissed me. Before I could gather my thoughts, the front door burst open with a loud creak. Karen came barreling out, arms flung wide like she was starring in some melodramatic movie reunion scene. Her face lit up with what I assumed was meant to look like genuine joy, but her eyes betrayed her, darting nervously toward the car, then back to me, as if calculating how much trouble she caused. Alex, she cried, rushing down the steps. Oh my God, you're here. We've missed you so much. I stepped out of the car slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. My polished leather shoes clicked against the pavement as I straightened my suit jacket. For a split second, I thought about hugging her, just to see the look of shock on her face. But instead, I simply raised an eyebrow and said, coldly, really? Because it feels like 5 years is a pretty long time to miss someone. Her smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the house. Behind her, Rick stood awkwardly by the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His usual air of bravado was gone, replaced by something closer to desperation. Jake lingered behind him, leaning casually against the doorframe, though his casual demeanor couldn't hide the flicker of jealousy in his eyes. As he glanced at my car, "How much do you make?" Jake blurted out before I'd even crossed the threshold. His voice was tinged with both awe and resentment, the kind of tone only a sibling could master. I smirked, glancing back at him over my shoulder. "More than all of you combined." Karen tugged harder on my arm, practically dragging me inside. The interior of the house hadn't changed much since I left. It was still cluttered with mismatched furniture and faded photographs that told a story. None of them seemed willing to confront. The smell of stale coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of mildew from the aging walls. It was suffocating, almost nostalgic in its familiarity. Rick finally spoke, his voice trembling with urgency. "Look, Alex, we need to talk." "Things haven't been great, no kidding," I replied dryly. Taking a seat on the edge of the worn couch, I leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other, projecting an air of calm confidence that must have infuriated them. "Let me guess, you're broke again. Or maybe this time it's worse." Rick's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Instead, Karen jumped in, her voice pleading. "We made mistakes, okay? We admit that. But if you help us now, we'll make it right. We'll be a real family again." "You'll see. A real family?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You mean like the ones where birthdays are remembered and kids aren't treated like burdens?" Karen winced visibly, but Rick cut in, his tone sharper now. "Listen, kid, we don't have time for your lectures. If you want to hold grudges, fine. But right now, we need your help. A lot of money is on the line." "Oh, so that's what this is about," I said, feigning surprise. "Funny how family suddenly remembers me when there's cash involved." Jake snorted from the corner, folding his arms across his chest. "Don't act like you're better than us. You probably wouldn't even be here if it weren't for Mom guilt-tripping you." "Guilt-tripping?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you think this is?" No, Jake. I'm here because I wanted to see the look on your faces when you realized exactly what you lost. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the folder I prepared earlier, the one containing proof of everything I'd achieved. I flipped it open and spread the contents across the coffee table. Bank statements showing six-figure balances, press clippings praising my company, photos of me accepting awards at industry events. Each document was a dagger aimed directly at their egos. Rick stared at the papers, his face pale. How did you? I worked hard, I interrupted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Something none of you ever bothered to teach me. Turns out, being ignored actually gave me plenty of motivation. Karen tried to interject, her voice cracking under the pressure. Please, Alex, just this once. Help us fix this mess, and we'll never ask anything from you again. Never, I echoed, leaning forward slightly. That's rich coming from someone who can't even remember my birthday. Tell me, Karen, how many times did you pretend everything was perfect while secretly wishing I'd disappear? Her lips quivered, but no words came out. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. And you? I turned to Rick, my voice rising slightly. Every failure, every scheme, every excuse, you always blamed me for not doing enough. Well, here's the truth. I didn't owe you anything then. And I sure as hell don't owe you anything now. Finally, I turned to Jake, whose expression had shifted from smugness to unease. As for you, little brother, I hope you enjoy living off scraps while I live the life you'll never touch. With that, I stood up and retrieved one final item from my briefcase, a photograph of the sad little birthday cake I bought myself 5 years ago, complete with the caption scrawled across it, "Happy birthday to me, 5 years forgotten." I placed it gently on the table, letting it sit among the documents like a cherry on top of the humiliation sundae. This, I said, pointing to the photo, is the best gift you've ever given me. Thanks for teaching me that success doesn't come from waiting for others to validate me. It comes from proving them wrong. For a moment, there was silence. Complete, deafening silence. Rick buried his face in his hands. Karen began sobbing quietly. And Jake muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like F***CKU. I grabbed my briefcase and headed for the door, pausing only to deliver one last parting shot. By the way, keep the frozen account. Consider it your late birthday present to me. The night air was crisp as I stepped out of the house, the sound of my footsteps crunching softly against a gravel driveway. I didn't look back, not once. That house, those people, they no longer held any power over me. With each step toward my car, I felt lighter, freer. Like chains I hadn't even realized were binding me had finally fallen away. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly for just a moment before releasing it. My reflection in the rearview mirror caught my eye, a confident man staring back at me. Someone who had fought their way 3 years of neglect and hardship to claim the life they deserved. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. All mine. Before pulling away, I lowered the window one last time. The cool breeze brushed against my face, carrying with it the faint scent of freshly cut grass from somewhere nearby. I glanced back at the porch where Karen still stood, her hands clasped together tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Rick paced nervously behind her, his head bowed in defeat, while Jake leaned sullenly against the doorframe, arms crossed and eyes fixed on the ground. They looked small, insignificant, nothing like the towering figures I'd once feared. Have a good life, I said softly, though loud enough for them to hear if they cared to listen. Then, with a smirk that carried all the satisfaction of someone who'd finally won, I added, and keep the frozen account. Consider it payment for 5 forgotten birthdays. With that, I pressed the accelerator, the tires humming smoothly against the pavement as I drove away. In the rearview mirror, their silhouettes grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely, swallowed by the darkness. For the first time in years, I felt truly untethered. No regrets, no lingering doubts, just clarity and the overwhelming sense that I was exactly where I was meant to be. As the city lights began to appear on the horizon, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. The journey here hadn't been easy. There had been sleepless nights, endless sacrifices, and moments when giving up seemed like the only option. But every obstacle, every failure, had shaped me into the person sitting behind this wheel now, a person who refused to let the past define them. I thought about the future waiting for me back in the city. My company was thriving, partnerships with international firms were expanding, and my team was working on projects that could genuinely make a difference in people's lives. But beyond the professional success, there was something else, a quiet confidence that came from knowing I had built everything myself. No handouts, no shortcuts, just sheer determination and an unshakable belief in my own potential. And then there was the idea that had been brewing in the back of my mind lately. A scholarship fund for young adults from broken homes, designed to give them the tools and support they needed to break free from the cycles of poverty and neglect. Maybe someday, someone like me would stand where I am now, not because of luck or privilege, but because someone believed in them when no one else did. Driving through the empty streets, I rolled down the windows and let the wind rush in, filling the car with its wild energy. The stars above twinkled faintly, their light dimmed by the glow of the city, but they were still there, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. I thought about the family I'd left behind, their faces etched with regret and desperation, and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just peace. Whatever happened to them next, it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I had spent too many years letting their indifference shape my identity. But not anymore. Now, I defined myself, and what I saw looking back at me in the mirror was someone resilient, resourceful, and unstoppable. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I parked the car in the underground garage and took the elevator up to my penthouse, the soft hum of machinery accompanying me like a lullaby. When I stepped inside, I paused for a moment, taking in the sleek lines of the furniture, the panoramic view of the skyline, and the quiet serenity of the space. This wasn't just a home, it was a testament to everything I'd overcome. Later that morning, as I sat on the balcony sipping coffee and watching the city wake up below, I found myself thinking about the lessons I learned along the way. Life doesn't owe anyone anything, not happiness, not success, not love. Those things have to be earned, fought for, and sometimes taken despite the odds stacked against you. But perhaps the most important lesson was this: family isn't defined by blood or shared history. It's defined by choice, by the people who show up for you, who cheer you on even when the road gets tough, and who remind you that you're never alone. If I'd waited for my biological family to offer me those things, I might still be stuck in that tiny, crumbling house, hoping for scraps of affection that would never come. Instead, I chose to build my own family, a network of friends, mentors, and colleagues who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And in doing so, I discovered a truth that set me free. You don't need anyone else to validate your worth. You are enough. As I finished my coffee and headed inside, I smiled to myself, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the struggles that made me stronger, for the victories that proved I was capable, and for the realization that I was finally living on my own terms. No one defines you but you, I whispered aloud, the words echoing softly in the stillness of the room. Not your past, not your family, just you. And with that, I turned my attention to the day ahead, ready to embrace whatever challenges and opportunities lay in store. Because for the first time in my life, I knew I could handle anything the world threw at me. So, what do you think about this story and my new writing style? If you enjoyed it, comment one below. If you feel it needs improvement, let me know by commenting too. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for the latest updates. Thank you so much for watching.